My name is Christopher Galik. I'm at the Nicholas Institute here on campus, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our work, thank you, on bioenergy. Our work on bioenergy has been going on for about 7 years now, and our primary motivation is that using wood for electricity production can be a near-term bridge. So before long-term investments, new generation, dedicated generation on the renewable side, or say switching from coal to gas, you can use wood in existing coal facilities as a bridge, either to meet renewable energy or possibly greenhouse gas reduction objectives. So a lot of our early work focused on what we called intersectoral competitions. This is the imposition of a new demand for wood and what that would do to existing users of the woody biomass consumption of folk in the region. So traditional timber industry, pulp and paper, saw timber. What does this new demand do to their business? What does it do to the composition of the forest across the southeast? And to do this, we use what's called SIRTS, the Subregional Timber Supply Model. It's maintained by Dr. Robert Apt over at NC State. Not sure it's actually that way, maybe that way. And he and I are co-authors on a lot of papers that go into this. It's a regional partial equilibrium model that focuses on the forest sector in the southeast. But I think the most interesting aspect is that it devotes a lot of attention to the actual biological component. And about 80% of the code is devoted to growing the trees in the model. It also makes use of this FIA data. FIA stands for Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. It's sort of a forest census that's run by the US Forest Service. And so what you're getting is essentially an annual updating of forest composition and harvest behavior. So you can see almost real time, or at least a year or two after the fact, what's happening on the ground. And that provides a very true to life insight into what's happening as a result of these new demands that we're putting on the system. Now, as I said, we started with this intersectoral competition question. We move on to biogenic accounting. There have been a lot of questions of, if you use biomass for electricity, what does that mean carbon-wise? Now, if you're talking about accurately accounting for every molecule going everywhere, and you could say what it's attributable to, the real life impacts would be a function of the harvest response. So how many more trees are you bringing on the landscape, the planting, or bringing out of the landscape, the planting response, how many more are you putting onto the landscape? Is there any land use change between the forest side and, say, ag or urban development? Displacement, or the pricing out of existing users of forest products. And then spatial and temporal dynamics. How many trees did you start with? How old were they? Where across the landscape are you harvesting from? Now, one of the interesting things that happens is that when you're accounting for this, you're not accurately capturing 100% of the stuff. You're making some assumptions, taking some shortcuts. And so what are the effects of the accounting framework that you use, say, to report your emissions to the EPA? What is the EPA doing in terms of modeling to capture these? And so we looked at one specific component of this accounting framework, and that's spatial scale. So if you're looking as an individual landowner harvesting a plot of trees, what's your greenhouse gas score? If you're an individual facility combusting woody biomass, what's your score? And then assuming the same scenario in the background, how do these differ? What we see here is that if you're looking at an individual plot, so this is an individual stand harvested for woody biomass, you get what's called a carbon debt. This is kind of in the literature of parlance that are sort of used. And you see a negative greenhouse gas benefit. You get this dip, and then over time it recovers as the trees grow back. So that shows a negative carbon score. It's worse, quote unquote, than you just using coal. However, if you look at the statewide of that same policy, so you add up all these individual plots, both those that are harvested and those that are left to continue growing, once you add up all those things, the planting response, the harvest response, displacement, you actually get a positive greenhouse gas benefit. And so across the landscape, the net benefit is a positive one, saying that it's better relative to not using biomass, whereas individually, you can sometimes get a negative story. And so it's this somewhat intuitive answer that we find that's surprisingly absent elsewhere in the literature. And so that's something that came out just recently, and being mindful of the time. So the results strongly hinge on issues of timing, scale, and magnitude, baseline, starting conditions, all the things that go into an accounting framework. In areas like the Southeast, it gets really tricky because you have this market response, that when you have a new demand, people tend to plant more. They tend to manage more intensely. And so it's not as simple as one in, one out sort of answer. Moving forward, one of the things that we're trying to do is move beyond this comparison, or rather this analysis of the competition between sectors and this analysis of the biogenic, the carbon story, but to rather take these things and drop them into an international trade framework. So what does the EU demand do to the southern forest composition? And what do EU sustainability requirements mean for that? Is there a feedback? So if they require certain carbon scores, does that change the amount of wood they demand from the region? And what's the then follow-on response on the forest side? I am out of time, but thanks for the opportunity to present, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later on.